Hi everyone, my name is Tara Schwartz and my presentation is on repair mechanisms. So what is conversational repair? Conversational repair is a very natural process that we use to sort of fix glitches in our everyday conversations. Despite what it may look like at times, it's not a sign of failure, but it actually makes effective communication possible. It helps us resolve confusion, correct errors, and steer our conversation back toward mutual understanding. So what actually causes us to stop and repair a conversation? It's pretty straightforward. Repair gets triggered anytime there's a hiccup in mutual understanding. And this could be because you, as the speaker, struggle for some reason or another, or it could be on the listener's side. Maybe they don't hear you, they don't understand, or just need clarification. And sometimes it's about the content itself. Someone might jump in to correct a factual error or disagree with a point. The trigger is basically the moment where a conversation hits a snag and someone decides to fix it. Repair is actually incredibly important for our conversations and how we communicate. It helps us negotiate the final meaning of our conversations. What we're talking about isn't set in stone the first thing we say, especially because, things change through the conversation. The listener and speaker might have different interpretations of what's said. I'm sure you've all had conversations with someone where you both walk away and have a completely different understanding of what was talked about. And repair helps us sort of solidify that. It also helps us hold each other accountable and enforce accuracy, making sure, again, that we're all on the same page with the right information. And it also helps manage the flow of talk, the pace and the pressure of the dialogue. We can pause, think about our words before we say them. And again, it sort of just redirects the conversation's end goal. So there are 4 types of repair mechanisms, and the first and most common type is self-initiated self-repair. It happens when the speaker realizes they've made a mistake, slip of the tongue or a wrong word, and they correct it themselves without any prompting from the listener. And my example that I have here is from my Your Turn transcript, and Greg here is asking, what kind of metal roof did you have in mind for this place? And right there where the arrow is pointing is our mistake. He starts to say one word and decides that he wants something other, kind of like I did in that sentence right there. And he corrects himself without any prompting from Sarah. And that is self-initiated self-repair. So the second type of repair mechanism is other-initiated self-repair. And this, again, is very common, and it can be polite or impolite. It's a 2-step process where the listener signals that there's a problem, but they don't fix it. The speaker fixes the problem. My example here is from the dinner plans transcript, and Julia mentions that she was thinking bad Brad's and sort of gets interrupted here by Neil, who says, "What's that?" signaling that he doesn't understand which restaurant she's talking about. She continues her thought and says it seemed pretty expensive, and then clarifies that it's the barbecue place. And so other-initiated self-repair, it's the listener, signals the mistake that, they didn't understand what was being said, and the speaker, completes the repair. And this one's really interesting because it's a collaborative fix. The listener's not putting words in the speaker's mouth. The speaker gets to clarify exactly what they mean. So our third type of repair mechanism is self-initiated other repair. And this, again, is a collaboration. The speaker makes a mistake, gets stuck, and asks the listener for help. But socially, it can be kind of complicated. The speaker is sort of performing an act of vulnerability, admitting that there's a lapse in their knowledge and memory. And they're also transferring the burden of the repair to the listener. The listener has to be the one to fix the problem. And, this can be done politely or impolitely, depending on the social situation. My example here, speaker A is talking about a bird that they saw, and they're sort of prompting the listener. What's the word for it? And the speaker B says a heron. And speaker A confirms that yes, it was a heron that they were talking about, but they didn't have the word for it in the moment and had to ask the speaker B to help with the correction. And our fourth and final type of repair mechanism is other-initiated other repair. And this is when the speaker makes the mistake, but the listener is the one that identifies and fixes the error. And again, this can be done in a polite way or a very impolite way. In my example here, speaker A wants to go to a museum to see the new Van Gogh exhibit, but speaker B corrects speaker A and says, "Oh, you mean the Monet exhibit? The Van Gogh one ended last month." Speaker A says, "Oh, right, Monet." So they're admitting that they have a mistake. And this is a pretty polite example. It sounds like it's, among friends, but I'm sure you've all been in situations where someone corrects you and it's not always polite. So there's a lot of social nuance to repair. The mechanics are pretty simple, but in a social context, it can get pretty complicated. We do have a general preference for self-repair, but it's not just about efficiency. It's sort of a social politeness thing. We can protect our own face and publicly display competence when we fix our own errors. And self-correction also allows us to control our own narrative. But power can also be used as a tool for cooperation or a display of power, depending on the relationship between speaker and listener and, the content of the conversation. While repair can be used to fix facts and information in the conversation, it also can help adjust the meaning, tone, and stance of the conversation. We can use repair to signal impoliteness, to let the listener know that we're frustrated, maybe we're confident, or, just the intimacy of our conversation. It can push the conversation along or deliberately disrupt the flow. So I have some examples here about how repair can be used strategically as a social tool. In my first example, the repair is meant to de-escalate the conversation. So speaker A says, "You never listen to me, just don't care." And that's a very emotional statement. They're clearly upset. And speaker B is trying to calm them down by reframing it. They don't accept it, they don't deny it, they just rephrase what speaker A is saying. And so they say, "Okay, so what you're saying is that when I was on my phone during your story, it made you feel like I wasn't listening and that I don't care about what you have to say." And the way that they're reframing this is sort of meant to validate the underlying feeling, but de-escalate the conversation, calm speaker A down, turn it into a more logical conversation rather than an emotional one, while protecting the face of both speakers. This is sort of a cooperative repair. It's driving the flow of the conversation away from conflict and toward a resolution. The second example is sort of a less polite example. Speaker A says, "My students are using thinking maps and their writing improved." And speaker B says, "You mean the graphic organizers from our curriculum. Let's use the correct terms." And this correction isn't really a cooperative thing. It's quite rude. It's obvious that speaker B understood what speaker A was talking about, but by correcting it to a very specific term, is sort of displaying their power and trying to make speaker A feel bad. And both of these examples are just to show that repair is always a strategic choice. It doesn't happen by accident. It's used to either build bridges or reinforce walls. So we use repair in a lot of different ways, but it's also just as strategic of a social move to not use repair. First of all, a speaker can assert their power in a conversation by avoiding repair. They, can let a factual error, harsh comment, or a misunderstanding stand. And basically what that says is that, I stand by what I said. I'm not accountable for your confusion. I'm not softening my stance. It's basically a refusal to engage on anyone else's terms, which can be used in a lot of different ways. unrepaired ambiguity can create plausible deniability, and it's very common in politics and corporate strategy to use vague language and refuse to clarify, and that way the speaker can be interpreted in multiple advantageous ways. And if challenged, they can always retreat and say, oh, that's not what I meant. But it can also be used in a more personal way to signal apathy or disengagement. If someone doesn't care about the outcome of the conversation or their relationship with you, they won't invest the effort to clarify, correct, or make sure you understand what they're saying. To them, the conversation is not important enough to repair. But a lack of repair can also signal intimacy between people. With close friends and partners, sometimes we just let errors slide. We operate on an assumption of shared knowledge and good faith, and sometimes we just don't need to fix our conversational glitches with someone that we're really close to. So the two examples that I have here of repair avoidance are sort of on different ends of the spectrum. The first example is kind of a rude avoidance of correction. The student says, I'm confused on the essay. Do you want us to use 3 sources or 4? And the teacher says you should use sufficient sources to build a strong argument, insinuating that that's what was said in the instructions. And the student says, but what does sufficient mean? And the teacher just says, you'll need to use your judgment. Next question. And obviously this is not a very nice thing for a teacher to do to a student. And the avoidance sort of insinuates that, the teacher's in charge, what they says goes, and the student just has to figure it out. And it's not very nice, but we have these conversations, often in our lives. And the second example I have is sort of a signal of shared knowledge between people that are really close. And speaker A says, let's use that thing with the colored dots. And speaker B says, yeah, that works. I'll get the stuff. And obviously, us as a third party, we don't know what the colored dots are or the stuff, but obviously, in their relationship, they do. And so if we were the listeners, we would probably ask for clarification because we don't understand what they're talking about. But since they are close to each other, they know what they're talking about. And so there's just simply no need to repair their conversation. So to sort of summarize everything, repair is a strategic tool, not just a cooperative one. It is a mechanical process for fixing errors, but it's kind of one of the moves that we use in our conversations to achieve our goals. We can negotiate our power, identity, and relationships every time we initiate, accept, or avoid a repair. Which, again, avoiding repair can be just as meaningful as repairing. Silence and inaction are not always neutral, and they can be deliberate choices that can assert dominance, create ambiguity, or signal intimate understanding. One of the most important aspects of repair is that we shouldn't just look at how something is fixed, but what is being fixed specifically and why. And ultimately, repair mechanisms are, kind of one of those tools that we don't even pay attention to in our lives, but they really help us build our conversations and help us understand each other. And finally, if you are interested in learning more about repair, these are the references that I used. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to our discussions this week.